Good afternoon, everybody. How's everyone feeling? There's some energy in the room. You're all given a sugar hit before you started this afternoon session, so I hope there's still some energy. Hopefully we're not going to put you to sleep. When I got asked to do this talk on life outside of medicine, I had to stop for a second because I was like, oh, do I have a life outside of medicine? And I'm sure many of you would have done the same. And then I reframed it and went, actually, my life within medicine is very different from what other people would say is a life within medicine. So, okay, maybe I can talk about it. And then I saw that it was the theme of growing up. And I was like, I still don't feel like I've grown up. Is that okay? Because I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So what am I going to talk to you about this afternoon? What I want to do is take you on a little bit of a journey. So zoom out from your day-to-day clinical practice, but really get you to think about your life and how your career and your medicine, your practice of medicine fits into that. When I think about mine, and I'll talk a little bit about sort of the journey that I've been on, it's traversed a very creative path, as Andrew said, and luckily for me, I've ended up in a space where I think I'm pretty happy because I wake up every day and I'm excited to do what people call work. I get to work on the frontiers of medicine, working in digital health and innovation, so I'm a GP part-time, but I spend the rest of my time running my own consulting company. Literally, as I walked on the stage here, I got a call from an area health service saying, we want to build a digital hospital, can you come and help us? That's the kind of stuff that I get to do. And it's exciting. I get to work with robotics and I get to work in AI and I get to do lots of fun things. I get to be involved in companies like SmileyScope, who are here sponsoring this conference. But I didn't always start out there. When I think back to, I was trying to do sort of a creative resume, but when I look at all the different organisations that I've worked with, they're not traditional organisations that you would expect from a clinical CV. They're not area health services or private clinics. They are all parts of the health system, and this is only half of the organisations that I've worked with. But it's really given me a reframing of what it is to have a career in medicine, and I really wanted to push that out to everybody else. But if we backtrack to where it all started, I thought you've got to have an obligatory picture of you as a child at a paediatric conference. But this is me at 5 years of age, and I looked pretty unhappy because I didn't like my haircut, and I think that was a home job by my mum. But I was also 5, and I'd recently arrived in the UK. I'd spent the first 5 years of my life in a remote village in India, in the northern parts of Punjab, and I grew up being very exposed to the health system, so I was constantly sick. I had every kind of vaccine preventable disease you could think of because I wasn't vaccinated. I don't think I owned a pair of shoes before I was 5, and I certainly didn't speak English. And suddenly I was having to go to school in a full, English school uniform, and I was pretty miserable. That wasn't my uniform though, that's how my mum dressed me every day. But at that age, I already thought I wanted to, my why was, why did I want to be here? What did I want to do? I was already thinking that at that age. And I remember having memories of wanting to care. So I wanted to care for people, and I thought I'll go into childcare because they take care of little people like me. And it was something that I pursued for a long time, taking care of my dolls, taking care of my siblings. And then I saw my mum become a community nurse, and I thought, oh wow, you can care for people that are sick, I want to be a nurse. And then I realised I was doing okay at school, and I thought, wow, and you can be a doctor. So I had this vision of being a doctor, and that was the last time I remember thinking about my why until I was a fully grown adult. And so I did the pathway that everyone does. I went and trained at, did undergrad medical school, finished in my early 20s, and I worked at John Hunter Hospital, did all my sort of early years of training there. Did what a lot of people did and went out and did a bit of locuming because I thought I'll get exposure to lots of other different types of medicine in rural areas and remote areas. And then I ended up following the general practice path because people said to me, if you want to have a family, you can't do any other specialty, which we all know is wrong, and I wish I'd known that back then, but I'm happy with the choice that I made. And that's me vaccinating Sam, the weatherman, if anyone thinks he looks familiar, even with the mask on. That was during COVID, and I did that on live TV. Not something I would ever recommend because you get bullied by a lot of anti-vaxxers after you do something like that. Still recovering from it. So that was my sort of traditional path, but there were some people this morning, I think at Kat's talk, talking about the slump that they had, post-exams or certain parts in their career where they were like, what am I doing and where am I? And I thought that this was where I was. I was on this conveyor belt where I had gone from doing the obligatory undergrad, postgrad, join a training program, do your exams, And then suddenly I was in my 20s and I'd become a fellow, and I was like, oh my God, and it dawned on me that what I was doing at that age as a GP in private practice was the same thing I could potentially be doing the day I retire. And these days people are retiring at like 70, so that's like 50 years of doing the same thing. And as much as I love medicine and I love treating the patient in front of me, it was pretty scary to think that nothing could potentially change and I'd be seeing the same types of patients. Yes, I would see them for their whole life, and you build relationships, but where does the career progression, where does the learning come from? And I realised that in other careers, my friends who I went to school with, they were in corporate careers and they were moving up ladders, starting off, right at the bottom as an analyst at a consulting firm, but they were going to go on to be a partner, and they were going to be a senior partner and keep moving, and they kept on moving. Whereas at the peak of what I thought was my career, years, I was kind of stagnant, and it led me down this path of like trying to find myself. I don't know how many other people have been on a point during their career to stop and go, I need to figure out who I am, and do what most people do. And I don't know if this is normal, but I felt it was normal, was to go out and actually deliver care in some really difficult circumstances to remind myself why I got into healthcare. And I ended up in places like, this is in Papua New Guinea, trying to vaccinate kids on the side of that that riverbank with YWAM, and I went around trying to fill whatever was missing with trying to help people that were really in need, because I'm like, these people need me. I was out on Christmas Island working with refugees. I did the full tour of all the options that you could do in healthcare. But I really hadn't gone back to examine my why, and hopefully some of you have seen this Simon Sinek video. He's become a little bit wanky sometimes now, but back then he was like kind of cool. And when I watched his video, and I was like, my last time I looked at my why was when I was 5 years old, and I wanted to take care of people. What is my why now? Like, why do I do what I do? Like, I know what I'm doing. I'm going out there trying to help people and in a primary care sense and see patients. But what's driving that? And I realised a big part of what was driving my why was that I wanted to have impact, an impact on a scale. Like, I wanted to change the health system. I was being very idealistic here, but I thought, I love seeing patients one-on-one, but every time I did that, I could see problems in the health system that I was like, I have an idea to fix this, but nobody would listen. Like, I tried talking to my practice manager, she's just like, go back to seeing patients, like, what are you talking about? And I tried when I worked in hospitals to talk to the chief executive, and the chief executive was like, that's not your job is to see patients. And I was the squeaky wheel that was always complaining about things, but I realised I was a systems thinker. But yet in medicine I'd been taught your job is to sit there and see a patient, and I thought, well, I'm actually really qualified to help you solve some of the big system problems that you have. And I had to figure out how I was going to do that and then what I was going to do. But I also realised that I wasn't alone in feeling like lost in the system. And as these years were going through, I realised there were lots of other people that were struggling. There were, articles all the time, headlines about physician suicide, and it was a global problem, and that people were really struggling with finding, happiness in their career. And I wasn't sure, is this just a system problem? Is it a structure of training program problem? Are we picking the right people? Are we supporting them the right way? Like, what is going on? And through my down the rabbit hole, I ended up in one of my favourite countries, in Japan. I didn't actually go here, by the way, this was like virtual tour, but I do love Japan. And I ended up in this place called Okinawa, and this tiny village called Ogimi, and they have the highest rates of people over 100 in Ogimi, and they're one of the blue zones. So there's 5 blue zones across the country that have been identified by this researcher from National Geographic, and they've got them in Sardinia, one in California in Loma Linda, one in the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, and one in Ikaria in Greece. So all beautiful places, mind you. And I thought, what is it that makes these people happy? Obviously they're not doing medicine, most of them, so maybe that's it. But I was like, there's something going on here where they live to a long age and they're happy people. And granted, it's mostly the women that live for a long time, by the way. So that was a cool fact. But it was that they lived in the outdoors. They did lots of activities outside, gardening, fishing. They had a great, lovely Japanese diet full of lots of fermented food. We all know that's good for us. And they drank lots of green tea. And with lots of antioxidants, and the researchers have gone, this was all great. But one of the key things that they had was this notion of ikigai, which some of you may have come across, but it's literally your reason for being. It's your life's purpose. It's why you get out of bed every day, and it doesn't have to be grandiose. It doesn't have to be, I'm going to change the health system, which was mine, but it could be as simple as, I'm just going to, fish for enough food to feed my village. And these people had found their ikigai, and this was actually thought to be one of the reasons that, contributors to why they lived a long life. And it was similar sort of themes in the other countries if we went across to the other 4 blue zones. But they had this notion down pat of ikigai, which I think many of us in medicine would really benefit from. So many of us look for the perfect job and say, how do I find a job that fits the middle of this, which I love doing, that I'm really good at, and I get paid lots of money and the world needs me. Great if some of you have got that and are right in the middle of that ikigai diagram there, but I wasn't there. And I think a lot of people focus on having one thing in their life that's going to fit all of that. But the people in Okinawa were like, oh, you know what? I can open a little shop and that's what people need and I can be paid for that. But what I really love doing is weaving with my friends. And what I'm really good is at fishing. So I'm going to do all of those things, and that's what makes up my existence. So they don't put all of their eggs in one basket and say, my job has to give me all of this ikigai. But the other thing that they did really well was they created excellent social connections. So all of these communities, so the one in Loma Linda, for example, it was a Seventh-day Adventist community, and they were very good, so it doesn't have to be faith-based, but they were very good at creating social connections. So they found that with the social connections, that people could live on average of 7 years longer than those people who didn't have good relationships and good social connection. So in Japan, what they did was in Okinawa was that you'd have a group of 5 friends who were like your friends for life, and you would meet every week, and you'd put some money in and have some drinks and eat food, and if any of you were in trouble, you would lend them the money and they would bring it back. And they had this real feeling of sense of community. And so what I realised that I had been missing, and maybe other doctors had been missing too, was finding that sense of community. And this is where I created Careers in Medicine, which was really bringing around disparate people who'd been doing creative things off the traditional paths and brought them here together. That community is now 20,000 people, so it's not quite your 5 people sitting in a little village in Okinawa, but it really does give validation and a place for people to talk about some of the interesting things they've done. And this is an example of one of the doctors that I had speak at one of my conferences, and he stood out to me because Andrew Peacock is his name, and these are some of his photos he took, and he's an ED doctor based in Brisbane, and I hope he's not in the audience because I'm talking about him, but I should have got his permission. But he's got these beautiful photos that he produces, but he had a really tragic event 20 years ago where he lost one of his friends whose abseiling equipment failed when they were climbing a mountain in New Zealand. And after that event, he realised life was short, and he went from doing full-time ED practice to 6 months doing ED and 6 months being an expedition leader, travelling around the world, taking these incredible photos, many of which are published in the National Geographic, and also sometimes working as an expedition doctor, sometimes leading the expedition, but just really getting his ikigai right about the mixture of things that he needed to keep himself happy. And you can read up about his story and definitely follow his page. He's brilliant. Sonia's another one that's in our community, and I don't know if anyone's read her first book, Going Under. Has anybody read that book? It might turn you off medicine if you read it. It's about experiences of being an intern, and it gave me a little bit of PTSD, but she's a phenomenal writer, and she went and did some work in a remote Indigenous community and actually was so overcome with some of the health and equity issues that she used that as a driver and inspiration to write her next book, which is Put Your Feet in the Dirt, Girl. And she's used her medical degree and her experiences and her practice to be an inspiration for giving her the creativity outlet that she so wanted. And she's found this incredible balance to try and do both. She's another example. The last one I'm going to talk to you about is Sarah Rav. And Sarah, it was really cool because I was looking her up and trying to find a picture of her, and she's a doctor. And my kids ran into the room and they're like, "Wow, Mum, what are you looking at this woman for?" And I said, "Why?" And they said, "We know her. She's like a famous TikToker." And they're like, "But you're like not cool, and why would you be following her?" And I was like, "I'm not following her." I said, "She's actually a doctor." And my kids were shocked because they follow her, and she's got 3.1 million followers. And she talks about studying tips and productivity, and then I forgave my kids. I'm like, "You can follow her, that's totally fine." But she's really good at helping kids understand how to study better. And she started off her journey when she was in medicine, and she actually became unwell with an eating disorder, and then talked about her experiences through social media and learnt that there was a lot of education to be delivered through social media, and moved over from talking about that experience to study tips. And she's created a whole new career for herself in the influencing world in a positive way, because she's filled, this gap that was in the market with people who didn't know what they were talking about, spreading myths about, how recovery from mental illnesses, and then moving on to sort of studying. And Sarah is an example of, she's probably found her passion and what she loves and what she's good at, but maybe the social media stuff doesn't pay, or maybe the world doesn't need as much as they need her to be a doctor, but she's still finding her way about how she mixes all of that together. And she's actually going to be on our podcast in a couple of weeks, so look out for her episode. But this is an example of the types of people that end up in our community, where they don't feel trapped by what is the path that everyone should take to get to the end goal. And we all know it's about the journey and not the destination. But I really want you to think hard about the next couple of questions, and even in your mind now, think about sort of what are your top 3 values? Like what are the things that really matter to you? And I doubt that any of you will say the number one thing is a certain position in a hospital, or a certain, a PhD, or whatever it might be. I'm sure most of you will put things like family and health and friendships and things like that into your top values. But why don't we use that to frame how we build our life and how we build our ikigai, rather than what we did for a job and what we went to medical school for? And I think it's really important to do that on a frequent basis, because the more you do it, the more you realise it does change. You wouldn't be worried about spending time with your kids before you had them, and now, my number one thing, my kids are almost going to leave home, and all I can think about is grabbing every second that I can with them, which is great with the job that I have, because it's flexible and I can do stuff from home and I can take them travelling with me. And so it's really important to make sure you go back frequently. I didn't do it from when I was like 5 years old and I thought I was going to be a doctor, to when I was like in my 30s trying to figure out, why I wasn't feeling I was in the right place. And I think also I felt it again when I watched the Barbie movie, and there's that song by Billie Eilish, What Was I Made For? I don't know if anyone's heard that song. But it keeps coming back to you of like, why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? But it's really important. You can't be a good doctor to your patients if you're not happy in your personal life and you haven't found, or at least be working towards your ikigai. So I just want to say, people take different roads seeking fulfillment and happiness, and just because they're not on your road or your conveyor belt, it doesn't mean they've gotten lost, and it doesn't mean you're lost. I just want you to all try and pave your own paths, and if you're interested in more, just follow Creative Careers in Medicine, and we will be running a conference early next year, so just watch out for the announcement of those dates. Thank you.